Good afternoon, everybody. This is Blake Robinson from ICLEI Africa, connecting to this international audience of currently over 35 participants from all over the world. I'm contacting you today from Cape Town in South Africa. And as you may know, ICLEI is the leading global network of over 1,500 cities, towns, and regions committed to building a sustainable future. This is our first circular economy webinar for African cities, and is a collaboration between ICLEI, the African Circular Economy Network, and UN Environment. After the first 10 minutes, I will hand over to Alex Lemille from African Circular Economy Network, who will be followed by Cecilia Njenga from UN Environment. Then Shannon Royden-Turner will talk about her work with biomimicry at Actuality. Muriel Diaco will talk about her work with Geoman. And then we will have Eddie Kolisang from Wiego and Cordy Aziz from Environment 360 in Ghana. At the end, we'll have about 20 minutes for questions, and then we will wrap up. And I'll explain briefly how the questions will work. So our circular economy work at ICLEI is quite a new area of work for ICLEI. At our World Congress in 2018, the organization adopted a new strategy known as the 5 Pathways to create systemic change through its work with cities in the coming years. One of these pathways is circular development, which looks at new models for production and consumption that build sustainable societies based on recyclable, shareable, and replenishable resources to end the wasteful linear model of produce, consume, and discard. Within this area of work, we look at closing material loops and maximizing the value of resources by applying the circular approach, reduce, rethink, reuse, repair, recycle, and recover, by encouraging equitable access to resources, by supporting new local and productive economies and job creation, working with the business sector from early market engagement to the delivery of circular solutions, and using procurement power to shift away from the linear model. In our various projects around the world, we engage with different aspects of the circular economy. For example, we're working on municipal waste management and how to close material loops in municipal waste management through the Urban Winds project, which looks at eco-innovative strategic plans for waste prevention and management, and that's based mainly in Europe. In South America, we're developing a guidebook for integrated waste management plans in Brazil. In South Asia, we're looking at integrated waste management solutions and assessing urban waste management baselines. In terms of water, energy, food nexus, we're working on the City Food Project, which looks at developing sustainable and resilient city region food strategies. The IFWEN project, which looks at innovation in the food, energy, water nexus. We're also looking at the creation of enabling frameworks for urban nexus initiatives in 7 Asian countries, and innovative and sustainable technologies for a resource recovery-based treatment of wastewater in 3 Spanish cities. In terms of looking at local productive economies, we are working on circular procurement and developing best practice guidelines for circular procurement, so that circular principles can be embedded into public procurement processes. We're also developing the City Business Collaboration Accelerator, which brings government and business together to, in the form of workshops, so they can have early engagements on collaboration barriers, new opportunities, and innovative partnership models to promote the circular economy. In terms of our work with African cities, I'm going to hand over quickly to my colleague, Claudia Schroeder, who's going to explain one of our projects that we recently conducted in Lilongwe, Malawi, which focused on composting. Over to you, Claudia. Claudia, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Claudia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
No, not
okay. So
sorry, Claudia.
yes.
Okay, I think we're having difficulty with the connection there. I'm just going to continue on with the agenda for today. So please note that the attendees are automatically muted throughout the presentation. And this is just to make the management of the questions and answering sessions a bit easier. So the questions will be posed to the speakers at the end of the webinar, and you'll be able to contribute them through the questions text box on the side of the screen. You'll see there's a gray bar that says questions. Please keep questions short and to the point and indicate the person to which you wish to direct them. And please note that the webinar will be recorded so that we can access it in future. As a general note about ICLEI Africa's work on the circular economy, we're looking to do more circular development work with our African member cities and are putting together a short questionnaire to gain a better understanding of where the city's needs lie. We'll soon be sending this out to the webinar participants and would really appreciate it if you could please spare a few minutes to complete the questionnaire sometime in the next 2 weeks. And we'll send out further details following the webinar. I think because we're having difficulty connecting through to Claudia, I'm going to hand over to Alex for now to talk about his work at ASIN. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Blake. Maybe we can have Claudia speak after my presentation if we manage to get her back on track. So just as a brief presentation, I am Alex Lemille, co-founder and general secretary for the African Circular Economy Network. So on behalf of my colleagues, co-founders as well, I will present to you the African Circular Economy Network today and with its details. So basically, we have a vision statement which states that we are looking at building restorative African economies with a focus on generating well-being and prosperity, inclusive of its people. So the form of economic production and consumption based on the circular economy principles and concepts will also have this social inclusiveness approach for the African continent because it makes sense here in the continent, and with the objective of regenerating its environmental resources. We are a non-for-profit organization registered in South Africa. ASIN, so the African Circular Economy Network, aims at focusing on who is the best expert in the continent to talk about circular economy adapted to the country's market needs, but also share the best practices from Africa to the rest of the world. We have a network of in-country chapters, and we'll talk about it in a minute. And we also connect with international networks and organizations. So what is the circular economy all about? Well, the circular economy aims at the reuse of vast amount of material, which is the foundation of new economic activities. So basically by restoring the technosphere, so the economic spheres where we have technical material flowing through the economy, we will generate feedback loops so that we can repair, maintain, remanufacture, redistribute, and also recycle material in vast amounts. We can also regenerate the biosphere by maintaining the biological cycles, so identifying all the food element and agricultural and non-agricultural biological elements that we will ensure that it's cycled back to the biosphere in a safe mode. So the circular economy is about restorative and by design and intention. It's about using renewable energy. The main principle of a circular economy is about rebuilding the natural capital, and we know how critical it is in the African continent to focus on the rebuilding of the natural capital. Here, recycling is not the preferred option, it's the last resort, because recycling uses a lot of energy and leads to the crushing and the mash-up fragments of material. So material is not always against in recycling, so we would prefer maintaining products repairing products or remanufacturing them. We are moving here away from chemicals. The less toxic chemicals in the product, the better we can regenerate the biosphere or reuse the goods. And waste is obviously here considered as an undervalued resource that we will have to valorize. In Africa, each chapter represents one country. So the chapters are teams of experts, be it in product design, waste management, urban experts, electronic waste, biomimicry, and many more. Obviously, there are many skills that are needed in those chapters, and we welcome any members that can grow our chapter teams. Each chapter member signs the charter on ethics, and for the time being, they have two main roles: promote circular economy within their own market and understand what are the market needs within their countries, and share best practices from their countries so that we can share those best business cases within Africa and outside of Africa. These are briefly some of the chapters from few members to a full team. Here, the biggest teams are from Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, but growing in other countries. So really keen on having even more members joining those teams, and obviously the missing countries that are not appearing on this list. A brief example of what's happening in Africa. A few circular economy projects or initiatives. There are many more, obviously. Why this title, A Circular Continent? Because Africa can not only leapfrog, but has in its DNA the understanding of how to reuse undervalued resources. It's been what used to be a survival economy, now moving into a professional economy. But basically, the African citizens understand why we would need to reuse and value material. They have also, this is also the continent with the lowest ecological footprint. We don't talk about footprint in circular economy, but here this is critical, because the lower the footprint, the easier it is to move to a circular model. And lastly, people, communities are highly collaborative. Obviously, there is a bit of, they are losing some collaborative aspect and moving to more individualistic behavior, but the collaborative nature of African communities is still very strong, and this is what we require in a circular economy model. But there is also this Green Great Wall initiatives covering 16 countries, and we have been speaking at the African Development Bank in Abidjan about how to initiate circular economy thinking within the Great Wall initiatives. Lastly, ASEN, the objective of ASEN is to collaborate with international organizations like WEF, the EU, and ICLEIR. We also collaborate with the Governmental Alliance for Circular Economy in Africa, with the governments of Nigeria, Rwanda, and South Africa. We have started an academia support program with few universities, mainly from South Africa for the time being, but growing. And we collaborate with global networks, be it in Europe, Latin America, or even at times Asia. And these are the type of cooperation we are open to work on with you in research analysis, training, opportunities on training, learning expeditions, networking and events, and knowledge exchange. You are welcome to contact us at info@asen.africa, whether to join our chapters or to collaborate on projects in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. This is Peter Desmond here. I'm with Alex, a co-founder of the African Circular Economy Network, and I'm taking over from Blake in respect of connecting the speakers together. And just a reminder, if you have a question, please put the questions in the appropriate question box, and we will come back to them at the end of this session. Also, to make you aware that this session is being recorded and will be available to participants afterwards. And I see that Claudia is back online. Claudia, are you available to give a few minutes to the project that Blake was talking about?
Yes. Hi there. Sorry, my internet seemed to have given me a little bit of trouble, so I got kicked out. But I am back, and I'm still available to give the presentation. Let me just set it up. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as Blake mentioned, my name is Claudia Schroeder, and I am working at ICLEI Africa. And today I will be presenting on parts of the Una Rivers project. Una Rivers is part of the Urban Natural Assets for Africa program, and the Una Rivers project is currently being implemented in 4 cities. That includes Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, Entebbe and Kampala in Uganda. Una Rivers has one primary objective, and the primary objective is integrating nature into local level planning and decision-making processes. In addition to Una Rivers, there's also Una Coast, which also falls under the Urban Natural Asset Program. However, Una Coast is focused on Mozambique. And for the specifics of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the city of Lilongwe, which is a project city of Una Rivers. In the heart of Lilongwe, which is the capital of Malawi, is the Lilongwe River. This is the main source of water for the city, and however, this river is being seriously degraded due to deforestation, sand mining, pollution, and land use change. The area in this photo has been earmarked to be a public open park for the citizens of Lilongwe, with the primary aim of restoring this section of the Lilongwe River. However, as with many open spaces in African cities, encroachment has occurred and many sections in the open space. This area is known to locals as the Toko and Lizulu market, 2 markets that have sprung up on each side of the river. These markets are known to be the highest point source of pollution on the Lilongwe River. And given that these areas are zoned for development of a public park, all authorities had wished to move these markets. However, these markets serve over 4,500 people daily. They are a major source of livelihoods for a huge percentage of Lilongwe's residents and are very important economic and social hubs, which have now actually become embedded in the urban framework of the city. As a result of its importance, and because of the council's plan for the area, this area was chosen for a pilot river restoration project under the Una Rivers program. A master plan was developed through intense stakeholder engagement processes, which you can see in the slideshow. Different elements and components were put together. A prioritization exercise occurred where all the different components of the panel were discussed, and the ones with the highest urgency were chosen to be implemented first. Waste management at the site was nominated as the first priority or component of the plan to be implemented. Activities on the ground related to waste management started in 2017. So the hard activities that have been implemented to date include capacity building, training 10 women in composting, establishing compost sites, which have been further developed to very small waste recycling sites, waste cleanups, as well as building a shelter that can be used to lock tools. And then as well, there's also been a project of buying various tools needed, such as wheelbarrows and bins. So compost making was chosen as the first activity, as it touches on many of the project objectives, and primarily 70% of the waste at the site is organic. This provides the perfect opportunity to generate livelihoods whilst also collecting waste and cleaning up the Lilongwe River. Primarily organic waste is also generated at the site, which is mainly a food market. Women were chosen to be in charge of the composting due to the various cultural and gender aspects of Malawi. Other than these activities, the softer elements implemented at the sites are actually the most important. Through providing these basic services, the entire way and process that waste moves at the site has been transformed. The different sections of the market have all given different colored bins, and they use their informal governance processes to ensure organic waste is taken to the compost site. So far, 15 tons of compost have been generated, and 5 tons of waste have been collected through a river cleanup exercise. The main generation of money has not been so large, although many women have been able to buy cell phones for the work. The composters express the main return on investment is being seen in that they can sell their tomatoes and produce for more, as they have better and healthier produce than they did before. The composters are using the compost on their own gardens, which then they sell back at the market. If you have any questions or want to get in touch with regards to the Una Rivers project, you can just get hold of us via our website, or you can follow us on Twitter, particularly the hashtags Una Rivers or Una Coast for any project updates. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for that presentation. And moving on, trying to keep to time as best we can, I'd like to welcome Cecilia Nyanga from UN Environment. If she could share her screen now and present to us about the work of UN Environment.
Okay, good morning. My name is Cecilia Jenga, or good afternoon. I am the head of the United Nations Environment Program based out of South Africa in Pretoria. I will be sharing with you on the concept of the circular economy as we understand it at UNEP, and also some of the initiatives we've put in place to support the work of many of our member states and other partners on circular economy in Africa. I'll start off by sharing with you our understanding of the circular economy, and we as UNEP understand it as a systemic perspective which embraces the entire value chain in an effort to mitigate loss of materials, both in terms of their function and in terms of their value, and also a shift away from our commonly known approaches of take, make, and dispose, and where we work to retain the highest possible value of material by maximizing collection and capture, and also ensuring that materials are retained along the entire life cycle. We also do understand that circular economy is multi-layered in terms of its dimension, and here I will try and discuss and share with you examples of how we have focused, particularly at the local government level and at the city level, where we see the long-term effects of transformation, where cities and local governments embrace circular economy approach. We know that in Africa, it's one of the continents that's growing in an unprecedented speed. We are told that 56% of the population by 2050 will be urbanized, but more so the characteristics of this urbanization process is that we'll see majority of the people living mainly in medium-sized and smaller cities, with less than 1 million inhabitants, and majority again of these people living in low income of what we refer mostly as informal settlements with limited access to basic services and infrastructure, and therefore the need for local governments and cities to embrace a circular economy approach if we will be able to meet the requirements, particularly for basic services and infrastructure of the people living in informal settlements. We see the circular economy as one that will be able to promote and adopt low carbon and low greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the loss of how we use resources, and also ease our burden in terms of ensuring cities are able to move in terms of mobility better, provide food in a much more equitable way, and also live in much more balanced ecosystem. I will share with you briefly some of the initiatives that UN Environment has undertaken in terms of moving further this agenda. The Global Initiative for Resource Efficient Cities, popularly known as GIREC, is a platform of collaboration to implement urban metabolism at the city level. GIREC promotes systemic approaches such as urban metabolism or urban morphology towards building low carbon resilient and resource efficient cities. A number of tools, methods have been developed by GIREC, which have been applied to cities across the world in terms of strengthening their capacity to become more resilient and more resource efficient. PACE, which is a partnership for accelerating the circular economy, is another initiative, particularly at the global level. And this initiative is mainly focusing around plastics and marine litter, as well as electronics and electronic waste. In Africa, PACE is currently working in Nigeria, where we are supporting the development of a national program on e-waste across the country, but also focusing on how the local governments can better manage e-waste within their environments. We are also in the process of carrying out initial baseline research here in South Africa along the e-waste stream of waste. The third initiative is the Switch Africa Green, again working with small and medium industries and basically integrating their role in the value chains across agriculture. We have identified 4 sectors, agriculture being a key sector for Africa. We still know that 60 to 70% of people across Africa rely on agriculture as the main economic sector, providing jobs, employment and income for the people. So SMMEs are integrated in agriculture. We are also looking at the issues of energy, particularly cleaner energy, and the role that SMMEs can play along those value chains. Tourism as another economic productive sector for Africa, as well as in the manufacturing sector. And in the manufacturing sector, I would just like to highlight the work that the African National Cleaner Production Centers across Africa are undertaking along the lines of industrial symbiosis. And it's basically saying within industrial parks how what can be considered as waste of one industry becomes material input for another industry, and ensuring as little waste possible along those industrial value chains. Just like to highlight that some of the number of tools that have been developed and applied under the GIREC, the Global Initiative for Resource Efficient Cities, basically to support the transition to low carbon resilient and resource efficient development through circular economy. This includes resource flow analysis in terms of understanding better the urban metabolic processes, visualization as a tool, capacity building at local level, including, this kind of webinars have been held globally to support the capacity building and capacities of people in cities to understand better urban metabolism, spatial microsimulation, including urban metabolism tools, which have been developed mainly to support the downscaling of national level data for use at local level in terms of ensuring that decisions are made through an evidence-based process, and including putting in place spatial elements, including scenario planning and building capacity for people to be able to use data to calculate and ensure equitable distribution of resources and how these resources flow through a circular economy transitions. These are just some of the tools that have been developed through the Global Initiative for Resource Efficient Cities. That map just illustrates some of the pilot projects where they're located. And as you can see, they're across the world in Latin America, in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Philippines, China, Brussels, and Cape Town. And I will go a little bit deeper on the Cape Town approach, in my next slide. In Cape Town last year, in 2018, we were able to do a much more in-depth study to understand the urban metabolism in Cape Town. As you know, we did have a water crisis in Cape Town and offered us an opportunity to try and see how urban metabolism or a circular economy, a systemic approach can be useful in terms of informing policy making and how we manage our resources in a more efficient manner. We found that cities rely very much, the city of Cape Town relies on fossil fuels, significant regional role in terms of food processing, and it also has a significant role in terms of local extractive processes. It's a coastal city, therefore fisheries are extracted heavily, agriculture and mining are key elements in terms of that extractive process. We also saw that the impact of the city's infrastructure and its resource profiling are quite critical in understanding better the urban metabolism. In terms of the study, we realized and we focused more on looking at the water crisis and the water issue. The water metabolism has dramatically changed over the years. And you can see from 2011 to 2015, the water security aspects have really changed, and the informal settlements are very much grown and very much therefore impacted by the crisis in the water security situation. And therefore some of the social interventions that we realized were very important is issues related to behavioral change and developing behavioral nudging messages, widespread messaging across the city, looking at financial incentives as a way to address that, and of course institutional negotiation, including, I will add here, rural, urban, linkages and interfaces in terms of ensuring that the institutional aspects and the governance aspects are addressed within that framework. In conclusion to the study, what we found is that the city needs to invest more in frequent, detailed efforts to collect reliable data on resource flows. There is need for us and for experts to analyze this data for purposes of evidence-based decision-making. And thirdly, the need for awareness-raising campaigns and training of consumers. In conclusion, I would like to say that for cities and the local governments, particularly in low-income settlements, where there is a huge deficit in terms of infrastructure and basic service delivery, innovation is central if we are to achieve our circular economy. What we realized, and really giving credit to the presentation that was made earlier by the African Circular Economy Network that showed quite a number of initiatives across Africa, we do know that still only a very small fraction of the economies, cities or local government, and particularly in low-income neighborhoods, have embraced circularity and have started the transition of a sustainable consumption and production system, particularly in a systemic citywide process. So this is something I hope that through this webinar, we will be able to discuss and come up with practical solutions and suggestions of how we can expand our knowledge as well as expand our actions and innovations to address circular economy in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, for your presentation. I'd like now to introduce, or just to remind attendees that we have a question panel. If you'd like to ask a question of any of the presenters, please add that to the question box. And I'd like now to invite Shannon Royden-Turner from Actuality to share her screen and to present to us about their work on biomimicry. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I think I'm going to select to do a webcam in place of a presentation, just so that you don't have to keep looking at pages of text. I thought that would make a nice difference for you. So I run a consultancy in Cape Town, and it's called Actuality, and it's really focusing on how do we accelerate change. So I've been working in all aspects of city making over the last sort of 20 years, trying to figure out, what are the leverages for change. And in terms of the circular economy, I think I really first started looking at it in 2000 when I did my architecture thesis. And I looked at a kind of a large building scale and how do we close all the loops within the building and make it completely self-sustaining. And that was at the building scale. And obviously since then, I've kind of grown looking at larger and larger and larger scales of the city. But it's really just one component of my work. And the work that I do broadly ranges from, how do we look at human behavior? How do we incorporate multi-stakeholder processes? How do we develop business cases for integrated urban solutions? What kind of infrastructure is needed for accelerating businesses within the circular economy or scaling innovation to a large scale? So it sort of varies. But the one question that I'm continually trying to explore is, with all the solutions already out there, which I really believe that we have all the solutions that we need already, but yet we seem to continue to do more and more of the same. And so I've been trying to explore what are the leverages that we can use to actually accelerate change towards things like the circular economy. So I'm just going to run through some of my experiences and some of the conclusions that I've come to in working over the last probably 10 years more intensely in trying to actually implement the circular economy, predominantly in Africa. And when I did my master's in urban infrastructure in 2010, I looked at a material flow analysis in an informal settlement. And really my question that I was trying to grapple with is, in areas where people are not paying for services, so there's no rates base, is there a different way of being able to deliver infrastructure that can create economic opportunities, and through that enable the ability for these areas to get a high level of service that could, pay for itself as well as start to create businesses? And so what I did was map an informal settlement to look at how do materials flow through this area? How are people using materials? Where are the closed loops already? And how do we then use that as a way of upgrading these areas? And one of the interesting things that I discovered was obviously that informal settlements are a massive environmental sink, in essence, for all building materials and electronic goods, and kitchenware and stuff like that. And because a lot of the building material that is used to build informal settlements is from demolitions. And so I started to question, well, that's a massive closed loop that already exists in the city. How can we intervene in that system to improve the quality of building that's happening? And so a question that I was left with out of that process was, what would a system look like if you were able to, at the city scale, improve the quality of material that people build informal settlements with by introducing like an upcycling phase from demolitions to reuse. And would that be a way of creating new economic opportunities in these areas, and through that improving the quality of houses that people build with? And then pretty much, and that was the main kind of closed loop cycle that I found as existing. And then the other interesting one was how people use water in informal settlements. Obviously, when the water is running at the tap, it's not very valuable, but once someone's got it into their house and they've carried it to their house, that water becomes very valuable and people use it over and over and over. So there's already significant recycling and reuse happening within the house in terms of water, but the result of that is that it's very polluted when it gets thrown away, and this gets thrown away outside our houses. And the impacts of that are huge in terms of a whole system of health. And then I had the opportunity to work on a project in an informal settlement to look at how do we address the wastewater, stormwater, and solid waste kind of nexus in informal settlements. So it was related to a bigger economic question in the Western Cape, which was the pollution of the Berg River. And the Berg River is used as one of the primary irrigation resources for the fruit that gets exported. And that was under threat from the European Union. So the government needed to look at how do we clean the Berg River. And one of the task areas was informal settlements. So we looked at how do we pilot and apply biomimicry to developing innovative solutions in this context. And one of the technologies that we looked at working with was someone called an engineer from the States called John Todd. And he's developed these incredible ecological machines, which is basically a wastewater treatment works. The reason that I was interested in working with these systems is because in place of throwing chemicals into cleaning water, he's created a system where there are these tanks that have a full complex ecosystem inside them, and that is used for purifying the water, because obviously in nature there is no such thing as waste. Everything is just food for some other organism. So we needed to figure out what was in the water and then combine it with the organism that wants to eat whatever's in the water, and then you end up with clean water. But for me, what was interesting about this approach is that instead of the cost of chemicals and chemical engineers to manage a system, you now have a system that is creating plants, fish, bacteria, algae. And in one of the projects that they had done, they had a polishing system at the end of the wastewater treatment works, and it was filled with koi fish. And there was at least $1 million worth of koi fish in that pond. And so that's an amazing opportunity. You know, it's not small value stuff. That's actually quite a lot of value. And what does that look like in the context of an informal settlement? And can we create businesses out of that? And then the other component of it was looking at the solid waste. And again, it was looking at not how do we recycle, but how do we upcycle? How do we really create a lot of value in these systems? And one of the projects that we looked at was done in the UK, where they converted cardboard to caviar. So they took cardboard from restaurants, put it into horse stables where it got mulched up and combined with the horse manure, and then they fed that to worms, and then they could feed the worms to sturgeon fish, collected the caviar and sold it back to the restaurants. And so, you know, that was a complete mind shift in terms of, wow, there's a lot of value in that potential, and what does that look like in informal settlements? So that was the task that we set out with in Langrug, which is in Franschhoek, just outside Cape Town. And the system has been implemented, but nowhere near to the degree of what I'd envisioned at the onset of the project, in terms of really realizing the economic gains, because it was always a water project, a solid waste kind of wasn't fully funded, so we didn't get to realize the idea of really upcycling at that scale. But the questions and the process still remain. And I think some of the interesting things that we learned from that process was, that when you're trying to initiate the circular economy, it does require not only collaborative design and collaborative decision making, but you really need to integrate in processes of leadership and organizational development, because in order to implement and realize change at that level, you need different kinds of leaders and you need different kinds of organizations, because the management of the system is so completely different. And suddenly you've got infrastructure that's delivering, business opportunities. And how do you manage that? How do you transition from traditional infrastructure delivery to delivering businesses? And then who gets those businesses? And how do you deal with that? So there's a lot of questions that arise through the process of delivering a project like this. And obviously funding was a critical thing. It was funded by government, and so it had a whole lot of constraints that typically come with government funding and processes and tendering that made it really difficult to actually realize the kind of bigger vision of what we were trying to achieve. But lots of learning, and I think lots of opportunities still to expand and still realize. And I think you also have to realize that you've got to build the pieces slowly. There's kind of an end vision of where you're trying to get to, but there's a lot of building blocks that need to be built on the journey towards realizing the fuller potential of the vision.
Shannon, I'm afraid we're going to have to call a halt there, and if you wouldn't mind turning your webcam off. We have.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your presentation. And there are a couple of people who've got their hands up, and I'm afraid that we won't have time for questions by voice. Would it be possible to add your question to the question box? Thank you very much. Actually, Ellie, I think we've got Muriel on next. Would you mind turning off your webcam just for a moment? That would be great. So I'd like to introduce Muriel Diaco from Juman, and if you would like to share your screen, Muriel, and present to us the work that you're doing in Africa on the circular economy.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. So I am Muriel Diaco, and I am the founder of platform Juman. So Juman is about catalyzing sustainable development in Africa. And we've been working actually around three main pillars: innovation, collaboration, and entrepreneurship. So basically, we are working since our creation. We are working more with Western and Central Africa, so mostly Francophone countries. And what we do is that we're working with young entrepreneurs, with startups, and with SMEs, and we help them to structure the projects and the activities, and we are as well providing them with resources that are critical for them to grow, and we as well connect them with business partners. And the common point with all the projects that we are supporting is that they have a strong link with impact creation, impact generation, and sustainable development. And we've been doing that for 3 years now. And more recently, we have started initiating projects with partners, always in link with impact creation. And this is how we are getting involved in circular economy initiatives. So today I am going to tell you about an example made in Cameroon. It is a startup with whom we've been working since we started. The name is Kemit Ecology. So why have I decided to tell you about this particular example? Because I think it really reflects how circular economy can bring value to African cities. When I say value, it's not only financial value, but it is as well social and environmental value. So Kemit Ecology is based in Cameroon, and basically they are producing green charcoal briquettes. So it is quite interesting because they're actually collecting their raw material, so the waste from markets and as well households. So they take banana, plantain peels, cassava peels as well, corn, and they transform it, they process it and transform it into a clean energy source. So what they are bringing actually is a way of cleaning up the urban environments, because today they go in the market and they just taking the kind of piles of dumps that they find. So they're making the environment as well safer and less prone to bacteria and germs that can cause disease. And they produce the ecological charcoal, knowing that today 80% of the population, I think in sub-Saharan Africa, is using wood or charcoal for cooking, and this has very big consequences both for the environment and on people's health. So I find a figure which is that 600,000 people die each year because of the pollution due to the use of wood or charcoal to cook. So this is just death that can be avoided. On top of that, to produce firewood, you need to cut trees. So it means deforestation and climate change. And also the traditional kind of wood and charcoal are really polluting because it emits smoke, and this smoke is actually harmful for the people who are using it to cook. So the solution of Kemit Ecology is really to provide, a kind of clean energy, and as well a better way to find energy source to cook. So their charcoal is called green charcoal. First, because it is produced from organic waste, and then because it doesn't emit, it emits hardly no smoke, so it's not harmful to people's health, and it is as well affordable compared to traditional charcoal. It is actually cheaper. So it is a kind of very comprehensive and very sustainable type of solution for cooking. So if we look at this example, it is we can actually learn a lot of lessons. We see that the opportunities are there because the business model of this green charcoal production has been validated. They've been working for now more than 6 years. And we see all the benefits that it can provide from an environmental point of view, and as well from a more social point of view. But if we look at the kind of hurdles that this initiative is facing, and as well think about how we can make the initiative more efficient, and as well create more value and really be more circular. So the first component to look at is really people mindset. So today, the startup is collecting directly from the market. If people were doing the sourcing themselves, they could actually make a more efficient and a more effective work on the side as well. So it is very important to be able to engage people and as well to change their mind about what they considered as being a waste. Today in this part of Africa, and I think it's probably the same kind of figure for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, 70% of the household waste is made of organic waste. So it means that it is potentially possible to recover this waste and to transform it into a clean energy source, or why not into as well composting. And yes, so the first point is really how we can improve the collection and the sorting really at the source. The second point is about authorities and as well how we can engage them in making more circularity. So today, chemical ecology has links with the authorities, but it remains quite superficial. And we see that there's the possibility of implying more the authorities, in the sense that the authorities have the ability to do more sensitization, to bring the people to realize and to act differently towards their waste. And as well, the authorities have this ability to make this initiative more scalable, and as well, this initiative can be replicated in other neighborhoods and as well in other cities. So it is very important to have the stakeholders working together when it comes to circular economy and circular initiatives. And the third point is about the initiative itself. It has been very complicated, for example, for this startup to get access to financing, because the startup was not, let's say, it is not a kind of common startup, the kind of techie, very digital, where investors want to invest in. So it's been a struggle for them to find the financing, because it's innovative and it is a kind of new as well type of business. And it has been as well so very complicated for them to find and to buy the equipment and the tools for the processing and the production. And so I think there is a long way to go. I don't know if the way will be long or not, but there is a way to go to as well find and put in place the right type of financing for those kind of initiatives, because they are kind of small. They cannot go and see very large donors or investors. So we need as well to think of appropriate type of financing and appropriate type of partnership to get this kind of initiative grow and create more value.
I'm afraid, Muriel, I'm going to have to interrupt you. I hope that's all right in terms of finishing off.
Yes.
I hope you'd finished your presentation.
Yes, I have finished.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
Sorry to interrupt you, Muriel.
No worries. If I can just say the last word. Okay. So yes, this was an example of the the work that we are doing. If you want to know more about circular initiative that we support, you can go on our blog, or you can contact me directly after the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Muriel. And I see that Eli has already shared his webcam. So I'd like to introduce Eli Kodisang from WIEGO. If you'd like to share with us your work on the circular economy in Africa, Eli. Would you like to unmute your microphone, Eli? Okay, go ahead. Please unmute your microphone again.
Okay, there, I think it's working. Hi, my name is Eli Kodisang, and I'm an organizer based in Johannesburg, South Africa, for WIEGO, which is an organization, an international NGO that works with informal workers. WIEGO has started a project 2 years ago called We Speakers Integration South Africa, which is aimed at ensuring that there is a beginning of an integration process of integrating reclaimers in South Africa. Just to say something about the words that I will be using, the group that we are working with prefer to be called reclaimers as opposed to waste speakers. So if I say reclaimers, I mean what people that are popularly known as waste speakers. And the reason for that is that people feel that they don't deal with waste, they actually deal with value, materials of value, and their role is to basically reclaim that which has been discarded by society. We started this process 2 years ago of basically engaging in particular with the city of Johannesburg to ensure that there is integration of reclaimers. And the project quickly, in a sense, moved away from what we was initially envisaged to more of a much more grounded and deeper process of organizing reclaimers around the city, not just in Johannesburg, but in a city called Sasolburg, and also in Pretoria, which is the capital city of Johannesburg. Just to say a little bit of a background on the state of play in South Africa as far as integration is concerned. First of all, no one has precise numbers of people that work as waste speakers or reclaimers in South Africa. The CSIR, which is a leading research, state-owned research agency, estimates that there are about 62,147 reclaimers in South Africa, but estimates go up to 100,000. And we estimate that in Johannesburg, about between 10 and 15,000 of those people are active in South Africa. And of those 62,147 that the CSIR has spoken about 25,000 of them operate as trolley pushers. You know, they work in the streets and they walk around on a daily basis, collecting, sorting, processing, and transporting material for sale. Whilst about 36,000 people operate in landfills, and basically their job is to wait for municipal waste trucks to arrive, and they sort through materials and they take that which is of value. And we because of the activities of that particular sector of workers and the fact that the state has started gathering statistics, I think in Johannesburg we have more or less an accurate sense of the kind of tonnages of material that is recovered, which runs in the hundreds of tons in each of the municipal waste sites. South Africa has a national waste management strategy that was adopted in 2011, which recognizes the need to grow green jobs emanating from the waste value chain. And the Act basically allocates responsibility for the development of guidelines on integration of reclaimers by the Department of Environmental Affairs. And currently is a very unique process that has been embarked upon by the state to draft guidelines for municipalities for the integration of reclaimers. And there is a process that will lead to the publishing of these guidelines, I think, in the next couple of months. And the city of Johannesburg is part of this national process. So is the group of reclaimers that WIGO has been working with, who have recently launched an organization called the African Reclaimers Organization. However, for us, the process of integration and attempts at integration with the city of Johannesburg has not always been a very successful one. But if I can just throw one more statistic to you, is that according to the CSIR, South Africa processes over 50.5% of post-consumer packaging materials, compared, I think, to countries in the EU, with process about, I think, just over 30. And 90% of this material that is collected for recycling and for reuse is actually collected by the informal sector. So the informal sector collects, separates, and transports material to point of sale. And these services are usually proposed to the state and to industry. So in a way, one can say that the informal sector actually subsidizes both government and industry in ensuring that there is removal of materials, and that the material is available for either reprocessing or repurposing. So one of the ways in which the city has dealt with integration of reclaimers has been to subcontract the collection of recyclables to private companies. And this has been done mostly in the wealthiest parts of the city, that is those parts of the city that have the most materials that are collected by reclaimers. And this process of what the city calls integration, which is really integration by exclusion, has actually had a very devastating effect on the informal sector. And our survey, where the city had managed to succeed in implementing these so-called integration plans, has been that people have lost up to 60% of their income due to this. And what basically happens is that the city gives out a contract and pays what we suspect to be millions of rands to these companies. And as a result of these initiatives, which actually allowed us to organize people for the first time in history in South Africa, to organize both people that are working in the landfill and that are working in the streets. We actually embarked on a protest march on the 13th of July in 2017, which subsequently led to an agreement with a state-owned entity that is responsible for waste management, which is Pick It Up, hosting a workshop and us having an agreement to basically come up with a framework agreement for integration. Now, that framework agreement has been sitting with the city now since 2017, and we are now in 2019, and we don't actually have as yet an agreement on integration. However, there has been one important aspect of this agreement that has been implemented, which I think will serve as an interesting example of how things could be done. And this is related to the registration of reclaimers. We started about a week ago to basically register all of the people that are doing this work. And the registration process will have a number of benefits for both us as reclaimers and also with the city. The first one is to know precisely the number of people that are doing this work. Secondly, to know the kind of materials that they are collecting and the kind of geographic spread and the routes, kinds of routes that they are using to collect the material. What has happened so far is that we have managed to register over 1,000 people, and there's a registration process that is ongoing as we speak. Now, I just wanted to say something about, before I go on to talk about how reclaimers have approached the issue of integration. I just wanted to say something about the social composition of reclaimers in Johannesburg. What happened is that the process of deindustrialization in South Africa that has been ongoing since the 1990s, particularly the collapse of the manufacturing sector and the collapse of the mining sector, has resulted and those industries, if I may say, have been industries that have absorbed a lot of labor, in particular from countries in Southern Africa, countries such as Lesotho, Malawi, Zambia, etc., Mozambique. And with the collapse of these industries, we have seen an influx of people, whether documented or undocumented, into the streets of Johannesburg to basically work as informal recyclers. And this has actually meant that our organizing process has had to take into account the fact that we have a lot of undocumented workers who are actually doing recycling. And part of the key achievements, I think, that we've managed, breakthroughs we've managed to reach, has been the fact that registration of reclaimers is across the board, regardless of people's immigration status. The only requirement is a positive proof of identification, which has meant for us that it actually allows for I think most importantly for the recognition and the formalization of the work of all the reclaimers, regardless of their immigration status.
I'm sorry, Ellie, we've run out of time for your presentation. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, but I'm very conscious we need to get to the question and answer session, and we have one last presentation from Cordy Aziz. Would you mind stop sharing your webcam?
Yes.
At least I do apologize for interrupting you there. Cordy, could I introduce you and ask you to share your screen? Cordy is from Environment 360, and I would like to give you 10 minutes, but we are running out rapidly for question and answers now, although we are replying to them privately, and perhaps I can encourage the panelists to have a look at the questions and see which ones they can reply to privately. Cordy, over to you.
So thank you very much. Just to provide a little bit of context, I founded Environment 360 about 5 years ago. In Ghana, we have almost 29 million people. We produce about 1.7 billion tons of trash annually, and about 238 million tons of that is actually plastic. Currently, we have a recycling rate of about 2%. The reason this is of a main issue to Ghana is because we are a coastal country. So we are conscious of the fact that it does have an impact on marine life in our oceans as well. Environment 360 actually started working in the informal sector in 2015. And what essentially we used to do is have small waste pickers that we essentially worked with in an area called Jamestown. Then we progressed into a project called Picket, which is essentially a waste picker led sorting center based in Timmins Town. In 2018 and then here in 2019, we're actually working with GIZ to actually launch a formal take back, which is an incentive-based program for plastic bottles or for PET bottles. The reason this work is really essential because here in Ghana we have, of course, a very linear waste management system. So the average municipality spends about $320,000 a month. Despite that cost, we still have less than 50% of our waste collected each day. One of the major challenges is that 40% of houses pay for waste disposal, leaving 60% that don't. The 60% that don't pay for waste services are typically in your urban and coastal communities and are made up of informal settlements. So what happens is that even the waste that is picked up, 100% of it goes to landfill. For the 60% that is not picked up, it is indiscriminately dumped. It is burned or it is dumped near the ocean front. So what we've been doing is really working with a model that really allows informal sector waste workers to come in and better support the municipal assembly, as well as provide waste management services to the urban and coastal areas so that we can have a visible environmental impact while also having an economic impact. Ideally, what we're prototyping is where the municipal assembly works not only with private contractors, as it's done in the past, but it also works with informal sector workers. Since private contractors have a tendency to focus more on your middle and upper income homes, we think that they can continue servicing them and continue receiving their revenue for them, whereas our informal sector waste workers work more in the areas that cannot afford waste collection. We actually work with a variety of private companies, such as the, such as the Ghana Recycling Incentive by private enterprises. We work with plastic recyclers. We work with anybody that's willing to give incentives not only to our informal sector waste workers, but also homes. This creates sort of a value for the waste. One of the main challenges is that, of course, in this particular part of the world, waste is really not looked at as a valuable commodity. So as a result, we know that we have to introduce some sort of incentive to sort of valorize the waste. What happens in this particular model that we're prototyping is that waste management companies are then able to continue taking their waste to the landfill, minus the recyclables that have been picked up. And then informal sector waste workers, they actually take their waste to a sorting center. One thing that I should really point out about this model is that if you look at it, we really encourage private sector workers or private waste management companies to also work with informal sector workers. Even though most of our private waste sector workers do, or waste management companies, even though they do service middle and upper income houses, when it comes to waste segregation, they're often challenged just due to the needed infrastructure to really carry out waste segregation. Since our waste management system is not subsidized by the government, you'll find that cost is typically the #1 reason why they don't do waste segregation. So we also think that there's a critical link between the private sector working with the informal sector as well. So now once the waste actually goes to a sorting center, then it's actually sold off to a recycler. At this particular point, since we're just building the system, Environment 360 really supports the informal sector workers in doing this particular piece. So you'll find that one of the things we work with our informal sector workers with is ensuring that they have good ethics when dealing with buyers, that they understand the quality of materials, that they can recognize the different quality of materials, and they understand what is exactly expected of them. This way, when we are building an industry, it's actually something that can work as a standard across all of the informal sector groups that we work with. This then will be able to give our local recycling industry and even some of our international clients a better variety of plastics, which makes it a little bit more reliable and contracts and other things more feasible. So now when we look at sort of our early impact, we've been able to do capacity building for nearly 500 informal sector workers. We provided health insurance for 329. We have had a slight increase in daily wages. At this point, it's about 15%. It's still a little bit early for us to tell what the real impact is, since we probably are about 4 months out from being a year. But we have seen a lot of promise in this. There's also been improved working conditions. Through our program, one of the things we do is help waste pickers set up a collection method with residential collection or a residential collection system. So through this, what they are able to do is actually collect quality material in an organized way. So it stops them from having to dig in garbage cans or dig in gutters to get this. We've also provided protective gear for all of the informal sector workers that we're working with in order to better support them in their work. They also have been able to improve their supply chain. One of the things I think about us having several different projects across different waste pickers is that they really sort of see the impact of working together and the ability for them to aggregate large amounts of waste in short periods of time. Because of this, Environment 360 has really been able to work with local recyclers to really be able to pick up more of this type of material, so that we actually have a budding infrastructure here in Ghana. And so far, they've been able to collect about 50 tons of material. Since the GIZ, our Kumasi project has been going on for about 3 months. The GIZ Accra project is just getting ready to start. However, between our other activities, between Picket, between GIZ, Kumasi, and Accra, we're actually projecting to collect 228 tons in total for this particular year. So of course, there's always a few keys to success that we've learned work really well across all of our projects. I think number one, co-design is critical. One thing Environment 360 tries to avoid is really creating programs or testing out our own hypotheses. We believe that in order to create a working system, we must work on and build on the knowledge that's already there from existing systems. So you will find that we don't look at our informal sector workers as sort of individuals that we employ. We really look at them more as partners that have equal say in how the program should run, what it should look like, and what should even be some of the goals and objectives meant for that particular project. Co-design not only goes for the informal sector workers, but it also goes for local authorities as well. We have had a lot of luck working with local authorities, but we think it's because we include them in at the very beginning versus sort of running the project and then making a set of recommendations to them. So because we are all working together from the very beginning, it really provides a safe area where people have trust and where we start to look at each other as critical partners to achieve our goals. Another thing that we've learned over time is that you must distinguish entrepreneurs from workers. I think there's often a false assumption that just because everybody is in the informal sector working and they have a successful business or they are a sort of an entrepreneur independently, that some of these individuals really want to be entrepreneurs. Through our projects, what we found is that there are two distinct types of waste pickers. You have those that are really entrepreneurial, that really, if given an opportunity, will expand their business and take it to the next level. And then you have those where if you offer them a 9-to-5 in the sorting center, they'd much rather do the 9-to-5 in a sorting center. So through this, we've been able to develop a variety of tools and techniques to really distinguish who should sort of be the leaders of the cooperatives that we are building, and who should really sort of take lead of a team so that we can continue to increase collection and make it more sustainable. And then, of course, strong relationships with local authorities and local recyclers. One we think is particularly critical. We've talked about local authorities because everything comes down to policy, but also local recyclers. We have such a great relationship with them. A lot of the times they actually do the training for the informal sector workers to really show them what type of material they're looking for, what type of material they'll reject. And this also starts to build a stronger relationship between the informal sector workers and the direct buyer so that they can eventually take up those relationships and then represent themselves. So just in conclusion, what we've learned is that cooperative models have shown a lot of promise to increase wages and increase the collection of recyclable waste, that it is important to realize that not every informal sector waste worker is an entrepreneur. It is critical that local authorities and other key stakeholders are involved in project development. I really can't stress that enough, particularly because of the climate here. We really try to stay away from situations where we're making recommendations to government. And then, of course, we have business models as well. I think someone's audio is on. Okay, but then we have business models that must be adapted based on area and workers chosen. One thing we can say is that none of our projects really look alike. They do all have the same core principles. We do sort of use some of the same core techniques, but when it comes to the actual business model, sometimes we have to adapt this, and it's really based on who are the workers available in that particular area, and what is the climate of that particular area. So just to learn more about go to our website. You can also give us a call, or you can email me directly.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yes, we're just now going to say thank you to our presenters, and could those who are still on the call, we are going to try and extend this call for a short while, and I'd like to introduce Sally Kasner, who is going to be just summarizing the questions and answers that we've had. Sally, if you are there, we have been trying to answer the questions as we go, but Sally, can you give a sense of the questions that people were asking?
Sure. So hi everybody, and hopefully, yeah, we've been getting some comments through and also some questions, and as Peter has said, I've tried to answer as many as I have been able to myself. One of the ones was that, will the webinar be available to those who have attended and who have not attended? And I have said that it will be, available to all, whether you've attended or not. And then quite a couple of questions that have come through around, so how do we do this? Which is a very big question to all the panelists, especially it was directed to how does Africa to implement circular economy initiatives, and how do we get our governments to respond, seemingly while the global north continues as on a business as usual type of trajectory. So I'm not sure if they are one of the panelists that would like to try and tackle that, but essentially, just from my perspective, I think it's through webinars like this and having projects like being presented today through the UN, and just saying, where are we in Africa? Saying, ASEAN have put forward a couple of good projects in terms of, we are doing this already, and the UN also saying that maybe we're not doing enough. So I think as long as we keep talking about this and also doing action at the same time, I think we'll go a long way. But are there any panelists that would like to add to how do we transition from an African perspective?
I can try to add to this point, to your point, Sally. But basically, as you say, it's a big question. I mean, when it comes to the global north, there are huge investments being made as we speak in these new models and new project companies popping up in the market. So obviously the challenge is huge, and the Global North has to change this pathway of business as usual. So yes, this is an ongoing process, but there are great initiatives from that side. In terms of Africa, obviously Africa needs to develop its economies, and obviously somehow linear economy will still be needed in Africa in order to grow the stock of material. I mean, the economies are still hungry for growth, and they need to still develop somehow from an economic perspective, and they would need to still a bit of linear economy for the next years to come. But when it comes to the circular economy, it's a matter of identifying opportunities from the waste, but also from the reuse perspective, and setting up some hubs to remanufacture and repair and maintain the value of especially electronic goods, which are a huge drama in terms of waste, electronic waste. It could be from a country perspective to discuss with the Huawei and the Dell and the HPs of this world, to ask them to come up with an e-waste plan, so that we can access consumer goods and dismantle them and remake and remake those goods. There are many initiatives in that sense. I mean, basically, in summary, create some feedback loops. So create returnable goods loops. You sell something to your customers, keep in touch with your customers, so that either you take the goods back from the customer, or the stream of waste, bio-waste back from the customers to create value, or to repair the goods that you sold to the customers and replacing it to them then.
Thanks, Alex. Are there any other panelists that would like to contribute to that particular question, or shall we move on to another one?
Well, this is Ellie. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Yeah.
Cool.
Look, I think that I would agree with what Alex had to say, but I just wanted to add a couple of things. The first one is that I think it's important that the informal sector in Africa must have an organizing base. In other words, I don't think that projects can succeed without some independent form of organizing and a voice, an organized voice within the informal sector. The second one is of course the investment in technologies, but however, to make sure that those technologies are not capital intensive, that they must be labor intensive in their scope. And I think that in South Africa, one of the reasons why we have such high rates of collection is based. Someone is speaking. I'm not sure if my time is up. Just to finish the point, the last one, of course, is in relation to industry. The need for transparent implementation of extended producer responsibility levies that must be paid for by industry, because at the end of the day, all of this needs to be funded from somewhere. And I think that ensuring that manufacturers actually are able to contribute towards the collection and the reuse of the material is a critical thing, and therefore the payment of part of those levies to those that do the actual collection, which is the informal sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie. Okay, so just to, I think maybe we could take one more. Essentially, is Muriel's presentation did spark quite a few questions just around the charcoal itself, in terms of would charcoal really be considered a circular type of approach? So perhaps Muriel could provide some context there. Their questions are in the questions box, Muriel, if you'd like to refer. But some also looking at training materials related to the ecological charcoal from organic waste. So yeah, Muriel, are you still with us? Are you still able to provide some comment?
No, I'm still there. It's weird, but I can't see the questions.
Oh, you should be able to see them under your questions box. I've put your name next to it, which means that you should be able to see them.
Yes, but I don't know. I cannot
can't see.
No.
Oh dear. Okay.
About the question about. Oh, okay. I can. No, I cannot see.
No.
Right. Okay. So the question about if charcoal is actually can actually be a kind of circular product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, because this charcoal is actually made of organic waste. So basically, it is the leftovers that are not used anymore. So banana peels, cassava peels, sugarcane. It's just the leftovers. It's not the actual kind of thing that you eat. So it's really the peels that are used. So it is actually the kind of waste which is then transformed, processed to make the green charcoal. So you don't cut any trees. And it is in this perspective that it is a kind of circular, because it's reusing the waste that are already available and are littering, doing nothing, to produce a new source of energy that is actually a clean source of energy. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Thanks, Muriel. I think some of the questions were around would it not be better then to either do anaerobic digestion or composting, and then the other one was in terms of the actual burning of the coal itself. Is it really considered a cleaner type of energy? But I suppose those are questions that you've probably come across before. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to just say a couple of words around that as well.
Okay, so they are very good and interesting questions. So the first one is composting a better alternative? I would say they are all possibilities. The fact that 80% of the population is using wood and wood charcoal to cook today is a big issue. So we need to find more sustainable energy source. And this is why the green charcoal is an answer to that, because it's using the waste to produce that kind of clean energy. And the second point is about the composting can still happen using other kind of organic waste. It doesn't actually it's not conflicting. I mean, there's not one solution to create circular economy. There are many, and we don't have to choose this way or that way. We can do everything as long as it makes sense and it responds to a specific problem. It doesn't make sense to, for example, for some usages, for example, to have a lot of compost if you cannot use it. If you're not in a kind of agricultural type of sector, if you are in the cities, probably it's better to produce charcoal, which will be used locally, rather than having compost and have a lot of difficulties to sell it to people practicing agriculture. And the second one was, is it really not polluting, right? So this charcoal is actually not polluting. Because first of all, it's reusing the waste. So it's using the waste, and it has been designed, if you want, to minimize all the kind of fumes and smoke that can be emitted. So the entrepreneur who is running this startup is actually a researcher himself, and he's done a lot of studies and analysis on the charcoal, on how to make it really sustainable. It's been measuring the gases that the charcoal is producing. It's been he made the charcoal very efficient from an energy point of view. So you using less charcoal for like say a longer type of time of usage. So if you want, I will say that it's not polluting, because it has been designed not to pollute.
Thanks, Muriel, for that. Peter, there was just one last thing I just wanted to add, and I think you've responded to it in the questions. Sorry, now I've just forgotten. Is it Cecilia's presentation? Yeah. There were some tools that she mentioned, and somebody was looking at how can the tools be developed, be used. Are they open? Are they open source? So is that something that we can maybe follow up with and provide that kind of detail or feedback? I think that would be great.
So, yes, because Cecilia has gone off the call.
Yeah, she's left.
So that
Perfect.
I think what we'll try and do is keep the questions and go through them and just make sure that we've answered everybody's points. And thank you for all your questions and comments. And we have overrun this webinar, and I do apologize that some people have already dropped off. And I'd like to conclude to say thank you to the speakers and to the organizers of the webinar at ECLE for making this possible, and for all the attendees for coming along and for your participation. And we look forward to engaging with you again in the future. Thank you very much.